it feels normal, which is a little anticlimactic, and a little hard to explain, except to say that for nearly 20 years, every summer, we've been flying here, flying there, driving here, driving there, playing one show at a festival, one show at some, strange civic event that has never happened before and will never happen again. It just sort of materializes long enough to give us a bit of money to play on a Sunday in August.
You play an event and they're like, that's it.
Shut it down. Well, we salt the earth behind us. We make really sure that it can never happen again. And so it's so common to me to be doing this in the summer. The fact that it has this, sort of new narrative component, for lack of a better term, of the band being over, hasn't really penetrated that much through the normalcy, because the normalcy is so deeply ingrained. I'm so used to it. All of my instincts for how to behave and how to experience it are long since locked. Like on an old amp you'll see that you've had for 15 years, the tape with the settings on it is kind of dusty and encrusted, and the knobs haven't moved in a decade, and everything's just so. That's how I feel about the summer so far, in a good way.
It's not something that you discuss regularly with your bandmates?
No, quite the contrary. Only in the abstract. It's sort of assumed and understood, so it's just more these moments of
pragmatic discussions?
Or no, more noticing that you're in whatever city or whatever venue, or even having whatever experience for the last time, especially when something sucks. That's where I've been noticing it so far, is when it's a really early morning, or when it's a really crappy drive, or when 3 flights in a row get canceled and you're sitting at the airport feeling sorry for yourself. You sort of remind yourself and each other, oh, this is the last time we'll be on this early drive. This is the last time we'll be sitting at the airport, at least in this context, with our gear and everything, waiting for the next flight. And I think that so far, because there's so much there's so many gigs ahead of us, the road is still very long from here. So it's those are the little things we notice right now, as opposed to it doesn't feel like it's looming yet. It's not starting to feel like it's time is tilting downhill and we're rushing towards it. I'm sure it will at some point. We're going to realize oh my God, we've been on autopilot for weeks on the road, and all of a sudden it's 2 weeks before the end or something. It's often that's how it happens, more than pacing yourself, unfortunately.
Autopilot is an interesting way of putting it, and I'm sure that this is something that you've been thinking about, certainly quite a bit over the past few months, of at a certain point, any job, no matter how cool it is, no matter how lucky you are to do it, does kind of become a job at a certain point. And maybe one of the benefits to knowing that this is the end, obviously not every band knows a given tour is their last one, is the ability to really take stock in things the way you wouldn't necessarily in a normal year.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. For me, so far, personally, that's been sort of the main difference between this and any other year of playing gigs, is just that I am sometimes compelled by the vibe, and other times have to sort of remind myself, but I'm frequently stopping and taking stock and looking around and trying to breathe it in and soak it in, which is really hard to remember to do on tour. And the deeper you get into it, the harder it gets. And I'm sure that, there's going to come a moment in the fall when I forget to drink it all in while it's happening. But yeah, it's been a lot more of that, because for the same reason I was saying about the things that suck, you're just wow, what if, because, maybe I'll go on the road again someday. It's hard to know exactly how final some of these things are, but it's certainly the last time we'll do them in this band, in this continuity. This chapter is really coming to a close, and it feels final in that way. And so, yeah, from the mundane things through to standing on stage with everyone going crazy at the end of the night, I'm trying to take each one and savor it. And you can't do it all the time, because then you miss what's happening, but that's definitely a difference in my attitude.
We live in a time wherein bands are expected to get back together. It's the rare band that doesn't get back together. So that the door is always open.
Yeah, but it's so. I've been surprised. Everybody has said that. It's wild. You know what? That's not true. Everyone that's like on a stage or backstage or doing an interview or that I'm meeting at a party, but that I know through the business in one way or the other, is saying that. And then the people at the shows and the kids on Instagram are like taking it really seriously.
This is the end of the world for them.
But to me, that's what I want, and that's what I'm doing. That's how it feels to me. I think that, well, everything you say is true. That it's symptomatic of this like cynicism, this corrosive cynicism that's like eating its way through the entire world of art because of where we are in the world and where we are in time and how it's getting distributed and getting consumed and all that.
From my perspective, obviously it depends on the person you're talking to, but the idea of leaving, I framed it kind of cynically, but the idea of leaving it open, I think can be viewed as a positive thing.
Well, in a sense that people don't want anything to end, I think sentimentally, which I also, I have that in me as well. But I just hate the idea that everyone assumes now that because there's money to be made and because there's like people want to consume content that has your name on it, that of course you'll get back together. When the Beatles broke up, and to compare us to the Beatles is obviously, we're many generations removed from them, if nothing else. Obviously we are as good as them musically, I think.
The Canadian Beatles is what people call you.
We're the Canadian Bigger Than Jesus band.
Yeah, screw Sloan.
They deserve to be the Canadian Beatles. Salute to Sloan. No, I've been really surprised and amused by just sort of the underlying assumption, and I have to disabuse myself of it. I find myself starting to forget myself and agree with it. And I'm like, oh, wait, no. I don't want to be lying in my heart while we're up there for this fall, while we're up there sort of like crying with everybody. That would be, I would hate to feel duplicitous or even just not utterly sincere about it.
You have to tell yourself that it's the end because it would feel false if you were keeping that in the back of your mind while you were performing.
Right. And it is the end, in the sense, and this gets a little, and I have a lot of increasingly esoteric thoughts about like what is a band and what does a band represent.
Let's go for
and
it.
All that, and this year is bringing that out as well. Oh, I can't stop myself anymore, or maybe I've just stopped trying. Farewell tour. This is
exactly. Salted the earth.
Yeah. Every 4-hour interview ramble is just is burning another deck of the bridge. Because it's like, for us, we're stopping the band. And that's, I don't know how to say it any more definitively than that, even though that opens up a lot of, what do you call it, ontological questions. But like we're just like everything else is a decision. Every creative act is a decision, in its way. And this is like now the final decision, the only decision we can make that prevents any further decisions from being made or any other questions from being asked. And like we took it really seriously when we decided to do it, and we're taking it really seriously as we do it. And so to me, that makes it like canonical, you know what I mean? As like part of it's now the end of our body of work. It's now like the official shuttering of the artistic hive mind continuity that is Tokyo Police Club. And even if we were at some point down the road to get back together in whatever configuration and call ourselves Tokyo Police Club, in one sense that would be a continuation, and in another sense it would be like a new decision that is birthing a new entity. And then, what if we got together under a different name? Would that be different? And I don't think there's no real answer to these questions, but because we are the band, we get to define like what we put out. Here's what the song sounds like. Here's how the record is produced, etc. We also, in a weird way, get to release this news as though it's a single. And I mean, it was accompanied by or perhaps as though it's an album and it was accompanied by a single. And that's been strange too, because the gigging and everything has the exact same flavor of promoting an album, except the thing we're promoting is our collective doom and demise.
I think important context, and obviously this is the case with any, job or project or relationship, but to me it seems, doubly or triply the case with you guys, because this is something that you've been doing since high school, since you were literally in your teens, that this is not just the closing of a band, but this is the closing of a chapter of your life.
Very much so. And in a lot of ways, it feels like the end of a book, because Tokyo Police Club was so closely connected to high school for us. And high school was closely connected to elementary school. We all met when we were 10 years old. And we talked about, we weren't a band when we were 10 years old, but we were music lovers, and we were like learners about music, and we were buying records, and we were going to concerts, and we were like, right, you're 10 years old, that's right before your world explodes open in terms of like meeting the music that's really going to matter to you for your whole life. I think for most people, you tend to run into a lot of that stuff between the ages of 13 and 19 or whatever. Certainly that was the case for me. And so the people that formed Tokyo Police Club, which itself was such like a manifestation of our love of music, were formed in our childhood. So it kind of feels like, wow, this is like book one of my life anyway, is ending, and there's obviously a sequel on the way, but this one is so, it's like everything was leading up to this, and then this Tokyo Police Club contained everything, or all of our lives happened in the context of it, and now for it to be coming to an end it's certainly the biggest goodbye I've ever said, at least so far. I
recently moved. I moved last month for reasons of, I got COVID in the middle, and it effectively like took me a full month to move. I moved outside. I was in Queens, and I moved about 2 hours north. So I've just kind of been taking the train back and forth and was moving my stuff suitcase by suitcase. But I was thinking about this in the context of life, and that that in life, we get very few opportunities where if you're putting it in book terms where the book ends, there are no like clean cuts in life, it seems like. And because this was so closely tied to such formative years of your life, is that part of the reason why this decision was made? Because you're effectively have been doing the same thing with the same guys since you were a teenager?
I mean, I think that's part of it. It's not like it wasn't the impetus, not that any specific thing was, but so it's not something we discussed in that language, but it has to be part of it. I mean, it's a strange thing to do for so long. It's a strange kind of relationship ever. Any band is a very unique organism. It's many things, and every band is different. And they seem to have an average lifespan. Some bands last for 70 years. Our band is pushing 20 years, and about 5 or 6 years ago, we started to look around and realize that very few of the people that we gigged with when we were starting were still around. And in fact, most of those bands hadn't been around for quite a long time. A lot of bands last 3 years, 2 years, 5 years. Somewhere around like 12 seems to be one of the lucky numbers. I haven't done any research on this. I'm just pulling it out of my ass. But I feel like a lot of the bands, and even at bands that keep going, you get like a Vampire Weekend situation where one of the key creative members of the band leaves and the band carries on sort of as a new thing that is also still the old thing. And there's a lot of that too.
And that's not even close to the most egregious example of it. I was,
oh my God, no.
The band Foghat?
The name is familiar.
They did Slow Ride in the 70s. It was a big hit.
Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
offered the opportunity to interview them, and I thought, I'm sure that these guys have interesting stories, and then I looked into it, and it's the drummer and all new guys.
The Guess Who, Canada's, maybe Canada's
famously.
actual Beatles. There's a big brouhaha that was on the news and everything because Burton Cummings, the original singer of the Guess Who, took the drastic step of like rescinding a certain kind of publishing agreement. Basically, I won't go into all how this shit works, but you just sign a bunch of like agreements with bodies that govern public performance of music, both on stage, but more typically like when you hear a song at the mall or whatever, because people pay royalties for all that. And anyway, there's just like boilerplate agreements that says like, yes, when you do this, it costs this much. Send it to the BMI, SOCAN, whoever, and they'll send it to me. Burton Cummings rescinded those agreements, so it's now the songs cannot legally be performed in public at all. He like firebombed his own earning potential just to stop, or at least block the like what he calls the fraudulent Guess Who from continuing to tour and profit off the band. And who am I to say who is the Guess Who and who is not? Perhaps within the name is contained the very seeds of this discord. Nominative determinism at its finest.
It's Burton Cummings.
Well, that's the thing. That's how it all shakes out, right? And like, if God forbid, if Tokyo Police Club were to fracture into multiple versions of itself, people would be like, "It's Dave. It's the singer." I mean, that's what people are always going to believe about bands, and there's varying degrees of truth to it, obviously. But it's so. I understand you got to put food on the table, and there's money to be made out there. But the notion of carrying on as Tokyo Police Club without any of the guys, let alone without all of the guys, is horrifying to me. It makes my skin crawl. I can't imagine even considering doing that for a second. So my sympathies certainly lie with Burton, although I also, I don't want to shit on any fellow musician who's trying to make a living doing it, because it's not easy.
Had you ever come close? Was there ever a time in the past 15 years plus when somebody was considering making that jump or taking time off?
Yeah, absolutely. To varying degrees. It's sort of one of the images I've used is it's just sort of a natural wave that comes in the continuity of being in a band. There's phases where it's exploding outward and you're really creative and it's really positive and happy. And then there's stages.
There's so many parallels to relationships.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's that plus 9 other kinds of relationships. I've never started any other kind of small business, but I imagine anyone who's started a successful business would also identify with a lot of it.
It's being in a relationship with 3 other dudes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's being in 3 individual relationships and all the different factorials, all of which goes to say that, it's sort of like sometimes it's come up between 2 of us, I don't know if I want to bring it to the guys, but while we're drinking at the bar, what about this? Sometimes it's come up between the 4 of us, sometimes people keep it to themselves. I'm sure there's times when all the other guys have entertained notions, however seriously, that I don't know about. And there's certainly been times when I've thought about, is this an advantageous moment to leave? There was a minute when I was like, maybe I should spring off of this, and which I don't think would have worked. I certainly don't regret any of my decisions to stay. But yeah, so because it's just it can be a kind of a rough way to make a living, obviously in the context of being a sweet gig and a dream come true. I think that's, if someone's listening to an interview with a band, I think everyone understands that.
You can only complain to people who do the same thing as you.
Yeah, exactly. And we do complain to each other. But yeah, it's sometimes you're tired of being away from home all the time. Sometimes you're tired of, Tokyo Police Club has seldom broken past the working class band phase where the way to do it is to say yes to everything. So any tour, I was saying in the summer, we're always zipping around doing stuff. That's because in the summer there's sponsorship money, whether through a festival or from something more direct. There's money to be made playing gigs, and when you're a band like ours, you have to go make the money or else you don't get to pay rent. Like, your kids don't get to eat food. And so you go and do it. And it's like, it's really fun, and I really like it, and I really love touring, and I really love the weird one-off gigs, but sometimes you miss home, and sometimes home misses you, and life gets more complicated as you get older. And so naturally there's going to be moments when, whether it's tiredness or frustration or contentment, these things are all sort of powerful forces to at least ask the question. And it's just that every other time one or two or three of us, or even all four of us, have asked the question, someone has been there and said, or, and then suggested an alternate path, which is with the band. And every other time, that's what we've done, because I think we all really like being in the band, and we all want to be in the band. We're all used to being in the band, so you sort of, the path of least resistance in many ways is to continue from one way to look at it. And this was the time that everyone sort of nodded and said, that actually might work for me too. And so that was, and then it was almost an easy decision in a strange sort of way.
You mentioned not being home a lot, and I travel a bit for my work, and I can appreciate that. And I spoke to a lot of musicians with kids who finally, their kids are 5 or 6 now, and finally, because of the pandemic, they could actually like be home and spend that time that they had missed out. How much of this decision is a product of the pandemic and sort of, I guess, reconnecting with what it was like not being in a band for a while?
I think for me, they're sort of related without being causal. I found the pandemic to be or the lockdown portion of the pandemic anyway, to be like a really important and profound moment in my life. With the space, and in Canada we got a pretty decent check from the government if you worked in the kind of work that we do, which was like enough to rock through the whole lockdown without having to go get a job or anything. And that's really, yet again, a position of great privilege. And I took full advantage of it, and I just was like alone in my apartment thinking and reading and listening to music really deeply, and sort of reconnecting with my love of music in a lot of ways. I was like posting on Instagram all the time, sort of rambly content about songs I like, if you can imagine me rambling about music. And
not about music.
Anything but that. I really just like found a new this is so corny, but it's true. I've just found like a new version of myself, as you do sometimes. You realize, you wake up one day and you sort of realize you've grown to some degree. You've changed to some degree. You look backwards and you suddenly don't recognize the person you were 5-6 years ago as much as you maybe used to. And I got to have one of those moments sort of in real time consciously, because there was nothing else going on. I was so bored that it just like that became entertaining. And I think that had I not gone through that, I might not have been able to even comprehend my life without Tokyo Police Club. It was always really hard for me to imagine before. I think I wanted to be in a band so bad. That was like all I ever wanted in my life. I really, really like fiercely desired it as a kid and as a teenager. And then I got to be. And right away, like without even putting that much work in. We did put in work later, but we didn't put in much work before we started because we didn't get a chance. We kind of like, it just happened. And I could never let go of that, and I think that having finally achieved whatever next step up the pyramid of life, I was finally ready to like make a decision that I think is going to be really good and really necessary. I think it was like, it truly was time for us to step away from it. And because we were holding on to it so tight. When you're that to something, I think it probably benefits you to walk away from it just to make sure you can.
This is also the case with jobs, just work in general, and relationships are both things that people tend to stay in spite of, not that there wasn't any particular toxicity. But in spite of, maybe it not being an ideal situation for where you are at that point in your life, because there's so much fear about what life would be like on the other side. And again, like, had you been in a relationship with somebody since you were 15, be terrified to break up with them, right? Because that's the only thing you know. And in your case, I think a couple of members like dropped out of college to do this. There are a lot of those formative years that, a lot of us spent studying something or learning a trade. You missed out on that to a certain extent.
Well, we certainly spent them studying something and learning a trade, but in a very different social context, maybe more than anything else. And again, we were really around other people. It was just the same other people all the time in a van. And that's so you form this really intense bond with this small group rather than the bond that people will form with just sort of like the student body at large, and as well as their friends. But just being in college or university or whatever vocational apprenticeship, etc., you're just around other people, lots of other people, and you're like, you're pinging off them as humans always do. And that's certainly something we missed out on. It was just a totally different path. It was a totally different life from top to bottom. And you could, like, certainly in some ways we made a lot of sacrifices for it, and we missed out on a lot of stuff. And we'll continue to, we're going on the road for 3 months this fall, and like, we'll miss out on things that happen here at home. And some of them will be tough, and some of them will be like phew, as life goes. But I think that it's, I guess maybe they're the same thing, but when you were talking about the sort of the fear of what's on the other side of it, and the term that came to my mind was inertia, more than fear, where it's just like, it's fine, it's good a lot of the time, and even when it's bad, it's kind of fine because you know how to do it, and you've been through it before, and it's familiar, and certainly with careers,
and you need to keep up momentum in that. Yes. That kind of job specifically.
You never get to stop.
Get to the next level.
Yeah. And I mean, another thing that I think lockdown did to a lot of bands was that you just, like I was saying before, you have to say yes to everything. You have to say yes. You can't. We took 4 years between records once. And from an artistic perspective, it was exactly what we needed to do, and I don't regret it. But from a career perspective, it was a mistake. It was too long to be away. And so we could never let ourselves do that again until we were forced to do it again. And even just acclimatizing to, life on shore makes a huge difference in terms of how you look at the band and how you consider it as part of your life or not.
You have time to figure out what's next. And again, being in Canada, you're perhaps afforded the ability to think about that a little bit longer than, in a place, not to name any names, without any healthcare. Hypothetically,
well, there's lots of those, right? There's only one holdout in the entire world, right? That would be. Sorry to talk politics.
I get the sense, I could be wrong, but I get the sense that you're not quite sure what the next book looks like.
No, I don't want to be. I don't have time to be, really. I don't know how to. I'm not going to know how to not be in Tokyo Police Club until I'm not in Tokyo Police Club anymore. I can't think my way there. I can't imagine it. I used to think I could imagine it, like when I was younger, and I would think about life without it. I thought I had a pretty good sense of it, and now I do not think that I had a good sense of it then, and I do not even think I could try to have a good sense of it now. And it would be pointless anyway. I could spend all day imagining it, and then when it happens, it's just going to be totally different. I don't know how long it's going to take to sink in. I don't know how long I'm going to spend like curled up on the floor of the shower after the last show. Could be hours, could be days. But yeah, then I get to be like emerging into a bright new morning with a world of possibility, I hope. And that's really like another rare privilege. And not everybody gets the chance when they're hitting, somewhere from quarter or third to middle age, to get to pick a new thing, maybe, or pick a different version of the old thing, or God knows, just to like stop and say, okay, now what?
I am thinking different version of the old thing perhaps makes a lot of sense, both in terms of you having done solo work and some side projects, but also this is an audio podcast, so the people at home can't see the brass fingering charts behind you, the amp. There's a keyboard. I can see a melodica, Yellow Submarine figures,
all my
guitar,
all my crap's
another keyboard
right here. Someone's staying at my place while I'm away this weekend, and I was like, I have so much gear here right now. I guess I'll just stuff it all into one corner and then do an interview in front of it.
It's hard to imagine. This is so your passion and so your life. It's hard to imagine the new thing not being a version of the old thing.
A few years ago, my friend Steve, who's a music writer, invited me to play with him in a Death Cab for Cutie cover band. He was doing a one night only. It was for Valentine's Day. Him and some of his music writer friends had organized this show that was sort of like I forget what the charity was, but it was like a charity fundraiser on Valentine's Day of all emo band cover nights. But it was a lot of it was sort of like a group fun project because a lot of the people that they knew from the music press would start at these bands. And he asked me to play guitar in it. And I was like, yeah, sure, that sounds like fun. I got nothing going on. And half of the band was like touring musicians, and the other half of the band was music writers who were just like having a fun time getting to do this show because they didn't usually get
music journalists.
Music journalists, yeah. And music arts and entertainment press adjacent people. It's a whole world.
People who write about.
Precisely. And thank you for clarifying that. And anyway, I was sort of curious going into it because three of us were like pros, and it's a particular, like anything else, it's like a craft. And if you tour for a while, you get pretty good at it, or you should. And then the other three, from one perspective, and I don't mean this critically at all, but there's a weekend warrior archetype, there's like a dilettante archetype, and everyone wants to rock. But just like anything else, just like everyone wants to write a novel, and if you're a novelist, you're probably like, yeah, you all think you can do this, but like it's a lot of work and it's hard.
And that's the story of so many cover bands and so many tribute acts in general.
Precisely. But all of which goes to say that playing the show ended up being one of the most fun gigs I've ever done in my life. And it was the beginning of this total reevaluation of a lot of assumptions I had about what a relationship with making music needed to be. I had always, because I wanted it to be real. That's always how I would phrase it when I was young. Like, I want to be in a real band, by which I meant a band that is professional, is gigging and making records and has fans and audience and is making a living doing it. And I got to be, and I always just went along with that childish assumption that was the only serious and meaningful way to make music. And only in really recent years, again, like since lockdown, if I'm being honest, have I really started to think of it as like, no, this is like an artistic. Oh my God, I'm being so corny. I'm talking my way to these like ludicrous conclusions, but I mean them very sincerely.
Obviously we've never spoken before, but this entire thing seems to have made you so philosophical.
Oh my God, how can it not? Well, I guess there's lots of ways it could not, but I don't think that for me they would be healthy. Yeah, so it's like an artistic journey that you go on, and everything you make is like part of that body of work and part of the something you have to say. And at varying points in human history, that has been like something that everyone has done together. That's been something that's happened mostly in the context of religion. Now it's something that happens in the context of capitalism, and therefore I have to consider it as like a real band is a band that makes a certain amount of money or reaches a certain amount of audience members. And that's true, and that's like the deal you make to do this, but I find it less and less meaningful to me as like part of what matters about what I do. And so for the first time, I find myself thinking, well, if I just write a song in my apartment and that's all that ever happens, or if I put that song in a tape and send it to 5 of my friends or 50 of my friends or whatever, and I never make a cent, and I do another job, and sometimes I play a cover night, or maybe sometimes I put out a record and it goes on Spotify, because now it can go on Spotify. You just press a button on distrokid.com and it's on Spotify. You're good to go. I could just do that, and like maybe that would be just as meaningful or more meaningful than going out to meet. Now you lose the audience, you lose the connection with other people. You do get into like tree falling in the forest territory. But if I'm in the forest and I cut down the tree, then I hear it fall. And that's good enough in a lot of ways. So I don't know what I'm going to do when it comes to music, but I'm going to really think seriously about it. I know that. Or hopefully not seriously. Certainly with levity. It is just for fun in a lot of ways. It's just also really important.
As a quick aside, what was the name of the Death Cab cover band? Did it have a fun cover band name?
None of the bands did names. Yeah, I don't even remember discussing that. Probably because I realized really quickly that I suck at guitar, and learning other people's songs takes me a long time. And so I was like, I don't have time to think about band names. I have to learn how to play the arpeggio in what's this photo album song that we did? It was I Wanted to Play It Too. Anyway, whatever the song was, it was great.
It sounds like you're describing, in the case of that particular that particular gig, in so much as that was the genesis of a lot of these thoughts, that it was the low stakes of the situation that really invigorated you.
Yeah, exactly. And reminded me of like what stakes are. And also you get older and you realize that, but like I took band stuff really seriously for a really long time, and it's hard not to in a lot of ways, because you're trying, you're trying
it was your job.
to keep
it was
it
your
going.
Life.
Yeah, it's your job. Exactly. It's your job. It's your life. And you go into it because you love making the music, and you're just so thrilled by the sound you're making, and then commercial considerations are like the Venom symbiote onto it. And from then on, they're inseparable and really hard to distinguish, and sometimes impossible to distinguish. And so your artistic journey becomes governed in part by like commercial success, which is really not a good mix, but them's the breaks. That's life in the NFL. And so there's like metrics. All of a sudden, there's like numbers and ways to measure whether you're succeeding or not, which is
especially with Spotify.
Oh my God. Yeah. But even before that, before Spotify, everyone was mad about first week MP3 sales. And before that, it was first week CD sales. And we used to have to worry about people leaking. And like, there's always, because it's just about making money at the end of the day.
But this is like next level minutia that you can obsess over very easily.
Yeah. Damn straight. But yeah, so every decision becomes like, okay, is this the smart decision? Is this the right decision? And then unspoken is for our career. And then unspoken is for the financial betterment of those who are on our team. And it all works in concert, literally. But so then you're right up against it all the time, and it's happening really fast. And it's like, oh no, did we not write the song right? Oh, did we choose the wrong producer? Like, is our friend not good enough at making records? Do we have to find someone who's like fancier? And these are silly questions, I think, but also extremely salient questions to your livelihood. And everyone acts like they're super duper important. And so you have to act like they're super duper important too, especially when you're 23 and you don't really know. And so we did. And so I was really, really, really serious about it, as the stakes always felt high. And then, yeah, it's when everything sort of came to a halt, part of that break was getting some perspective and realizing like none of these decisions on their own are going to either make me a millionaire or ruin me. And maybe none of them they're all just going to add up to whatever happened. And also, so is a bunch of other stuff that we cannot control or predict. And it's fine. You can like chill out a bit about it, and you might actually find yourself making more interesting decisions, which in my experience is really the coolest and it's the only reliable thing you can do, even from a career perspective, as far as longevity is concerned.
Right before this call, I was listening to some of your Bandcamp output, and in the case of the stuff that has your name on it, what is it? Canmore Hotel, right?
Yeah.
Great song.
Thanks.
Very very, very thoughtful song, and a serious song. And then there's what is it? Girlfriend Material. Yeah. Is that the one that had a couple of Santa Claus albums?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So these are obviously two very different approaches. Girlfriend Material specifically seems like you taking the lessons from the Death Cab bands, that this can be fun and this can be light, and running with it.
Yeah, very much so. Girlfriend Material was actually one of the times that the time before this, I was the most serious about maybe not doing Tokyo Blues Club anymore. Was right around the same time that I started Girlfriend Material. And I was experimenting with a lot of projects. I was getting really into like filmmaking and script writing, and I thought I wanted to try and pursue that. It was interesting to me artistically, but also it seemed, at least in like 2016, that there was a lot more money to be made doing that than there was being in an independent rock band. I don't know if that was true then. I don't think it is true now. But so for one of the projects I'd worked on, I just needed some music, and so I'd had writer's block for ages and ages, and I'd like really fallen out of love with making music. I'd like really lost my way. It was after Force Field, and we'd been on this like more big swings tip for a while, and made some really cool music. And I loved Force Field, and I believed in Force Field. And then like the label hated it, I think.
When you say big swings, what does that mean in this context?
Like you're trying to hit the next level. You're looking at the stages you're playing and your audience sizes and like your festival billing, and at that point you're starting to see Spotify numbers. Before that, your record sales, all the metrics.
Is it too crass to say that you were intentionally trying to create more commercial material?
Well, it's not too crass and it's not inaccurate, but I always find myself tiptoeing around it because I think that notion has so much baggage.
Yeah, of course.
That it doesn't do justice. It makes people dismissive of the music. And people listen, that's people's right. And like people heard those records and were dismissive of it. Like when Hot Tonight was the first single off Force Field, there was a subsection of our fans who were like, this is phony bullshit. And that's, because it has some of the sonic signifiers that one might associate with phony bullshit. It's a little shinier, so to speak. It's a little more slickly produced. The songwriting is more deliberate and more direct. And these are things that people have come to associate with dishonesty. And there is a lot of dishonesty out there in music. And you're compelled to be dishonest in a lot of ways. But one thing I'm really proud of is that Tokyo Police Club was always really honest. And our compass sometimes pointed in some directions that in retrospect I might have I wish I'd had the opportunity to tweak or consider. But we always were like, this is what we're doing. And we did the shit out of it we really worked our asses off. I always say we held up our end of the bargain.
I want to expand on what you mean by honesty here.
That's a good question. I wonder if I can explain myself. I know what I mean, but sometimes it's more of a feeling than a definition. When we were 18 and we were starting Tokyo Police Club in Josh's basement, and it hadn't cohered yet, and it was madness basically. Like someone was on the ground just going with a delay pedal, and the wrong person was playing drums, and there was no low end, and there was an organ with a shoe on it holding down a note.
You were a high school band.
We were a high school band, and we were just so in love with the sound we were making. We couldn't fucking believe it. We were just our own. We loved our band so much, and we loved what we were doing, even though nobody else did. And right from the beginning, all of our friends were like, "What? Are you guys serious right now? You guys need to get real." But we always believed in it, and everything we made was an earnest expression of that belief. And we would look at each other and look for excitement and look for fun. And we've always been really thoughtful about it. We've always been really purposeful, and we've talked about our songs a lot. We've tried out different iterations of them a lot. And so it was a really natural step for us to turn that instrument in a more direct direction, which is, I think, in this context, what we mean when we say commercial. And, we did it on Champ kind of by accident. I've learned recently that when you listen to a Foo Fighters record or a Blink-182 record or whatever, these records, these alt rock records, they're how did you How do you have 3 hits that solid? And then you always find out it's like, yeah, they worked on like 120 songs, and they just were like relentless making them better, and they would carve them up and put pieces of them together. And we started doing that during the writing for Champ, just really naturally, because we were trying to figure out other ways to write songs, and we were really we were just excited by the possibilities when you're doing it all day, every day, and you're in fancy rehearsal space in Toronto. And by fancy, I mean dingy, but it felt fancy to us. I don't know, we just always were really excited by the notion of grabbing a verse and oh my God, look how well it works with that chorus. Like now we're saying something totally new, and it sounds more like the music we grew up listening to, which was all on the radio and on Much Music, because that's what we had back then. There was not enough internet to get and to be like the cool digital older brother or sister.
Sure, but you had Nardwuar before the rest of us.
Yeah, man, and that's where like that was pretty indie, I guess. But the music videos that would play after Nardwuar most of the time were like the hits, the alt rock hits, the same songs that were on the radio, and fortunately they all kick ass, luckily. And so anyway, then when it came time to consider doing that with a little bit more of an eye towards like, okay, like what does it sound like to write towards a single? What is yielded if Dave goes and works on a song with someone else who's not in the band, like a quote unquote professional songwriter, which we did. That was the only time that we did that, was on that record. And I think the answers to those questions artistically are really interesting. And so thinking of them in the context of like, commodification or whatever is, I find it sadly reductive when it's so much more interesting to consider the music. To me, of course. I mean, this is real navel-gazing shit, but I've always felt that I needed to be Tokyo Police Club's biggest fan because no one else in the commentariat was doing it. So I've just decided I'm going to be out here praising us constantly. Band's over. Who cares? I'm allowed. I'm a cheerleader now. But yeah, so by honesty, I mean like that feeling that we had in the basement, looping the delay pedal, locking eyes with each other and like cackling with the glee of pure creation, and the way that we would like let a song be finished when we finally felt our excitement had reached a fever pitch and been properly contained isn't quite the right word, but documented, captured. That's the same process and the same like energy and attitude that we brought to making Hot Tonight and that we brought to making The Ocean or whatever your shinier sounding TPC song of choice is. So, and maybe everyone always feels that way, maybe I am fooling myself, but then again, maybe none of this stuff is actually like objective at all. So you just kind of do it. And that's the beauty of a band. It just kind of becomes what it is and what it was.
A lot of it is cynical, like, and that's why people have that instinctual reaction to it.
People are right to be suspicious.
Yeah,
people are right to call out the bullshit. I hope they keep doing it because there's about to be a whole lot more.
So we're coming up on an hour, so we can end on this. But this is something I've thought about a lot as I'm getting older, and I always. A part of me always feels cringy saying it, but the older I get and the more creative people that I talk to through venues like this podcast, the more I think about the fact that to a certain extent, some of these things, embracing commerciality is a great example of it, are, I guess this is going to sound so hokey, but there is, it's maturity in that. I think an important part of maturity, and this is something that I think you're really going to experience, like finally being in this new chapter of your life, but is taking a moment to re-examine your, what they call in therapy, your core beliefs, and the arbitrary things that you've kept with you for decades because of something you felt when you were 15.
I completely agree with all of that.
We alluded to this before, but there's a certain level of maturity and next steps that maybe you weren't afforded the opportunity to take because you've been doing the same thing with the same band and same group of guys since, that this is an opportunity to challenge and re-examine some of those core beliefs.
It has to be. I mean, I think it would be such a wasted opportunity to not do that. And it's happening already, I'm sure. And it's happened, some of the core beliefs that I already reassessed are probably, again, things that led to my willingness to walk away from this thing that for so long I've held so dear.
You're so okay with it.
Yeah, well, I am right now. I mean, talk to me again in November. But I think also it just because I have loved it and held it so dearly, and because of the nature of what a band is, it's taken up a tremendous amount of space in my psyche and in my being and existence this whole time. And it's been an amount of space I've been most of the time more than happy to give it, because it's felt proportionate to how important I consider it to be. And I don't think I was wrong to give it that much space, or also too late now, who cares? But it's really exciting to consider how much space there's about to be in my brain, it takes up for me way more than it literally needs, the time that I'm in rehearsal working on songs, on tour, even the time that I'm answering emails about management stuff, it pales in comparison to the time that I'm not doing those things. We have a lot of time off. It's one of the best parts of the job, honestly, is that you're when you get a little older, if you're a little more successful, you're just fucking home all the time. Some people don't like that. I enjoy it. But when I'm at home, it's with me. Everywhere I go, it's with me, from, whether there's a TPC, I don't have a poster up right now, but usually I do. And the gear's all around me. And also it's just who I am, and everyone, Graham from Tokyo Police Club is how people refer to me in conversation with other people that aren't my dear friends. And that goes to your head, whether that's, healthy or wise or whatever is beside the point, especially when you're a kid, and we were kids. It's I'm Graham from Tokyo Police Club. That's I only ever wanted to be Graham from the band, and that's the band that filled in that role. So it's of course I'm going to have imprinted on it and made it part of me.
It's a double-edged sword, right? Because you're describing the pride you're taking in it, but you're also kind of describing that you've lost a little bit of that personal identity because you're part of this sort of larger group, and that's how people think of you.
I gave it to the band, and I took from the band that same amount. We made a deal, another Venom symbiote of sorts. Although this one, like the Venom symbiote in the movies, this one has done nothing but improve my life. And yeah, but when you make that deal, you don't consider how it will grow, that conjoined part of you with the band, or how it won't grow. There's an old, I'm referencing a lot this old saying that when you join a band, you arrest emotionally at the age you're at when you join the band. And while I have found that to not be true across my life, I do think that within the band there is a certain amount of that. And the part of you that you merge with the band maybe does stay 19. And maybe that's part of the appeal, because who doesn't at least a little bit want to stay 19 forever? Isn't that what rock and roll is all about at the end of the day? Isn't that what we're doing? Isn't that what Mick Jagger's doing up there, prancing around at 90 or whatever, is basically just promising everybody it's okay. You could be 19 forever in the way that matters, because who doesn't want to stay young? But I'm really ready to say goodbye to the 19-year-old me. It was great. And the band was great. It was so much fucking fun, and it was so cool, and it was way better than I ever expected getting to be in a band would be, even though it was also totally different. It was a crazy good ride. I would not trade any of it for anything. And also, I'm man, this is a great moment to say thank you. And really, that's what we're doing all year, is saying thank you, yes, to the fans and the audience. And I always feel I must shout out the fans and the audience, because it's been really fucking sick and validating to get so much great, beautiful response from people. Just wow, amazing, great stuff. You love to see it. But also we're saying goodbye to each other, but also we're all saying goodbye to Tokyo Police Club. And that means something really different to everyone, but I know it means something really big to everyone, and it certainly fucking does to me. And it's cool to be like, yeah, we're going to spend this time honoring that. And then we're going to like bury it in the ground or whatever it is. We're going to set it free. That's what we're doing. We're setting it free. It's time for it to fly on its own two wings and for us to do the same, I suppose.